Welcome to This Week in American History, covering July 27th through August 2nd. This week, we travel from the battlefields of Korea and the closing days of World War II to the halls of Congress, the birth of America's space program, the expansion of the Union, and one of the most important documents in our nation's history. Across these 7 days, we'll explore moments of sacrifice, constitutional change, scientific ambition, innovation, expansion, and independence. Each event tells a different part of the American story and reminds us that the nation we inherited was shaped by decisions made by generations before us. We begin on July 27, 1953, when after 3 years of brutal fighting on the Korean Peninsula, the guns finally began to fall silent. On July 27, 1953, after more than 3 years of brutal warfare, representatives gathered at Panmunjom to sign the Korean Armistice Agreement. The agreement did not create permanent peace, but it ordered an end to active hostilities and began the process of separating opposing forces across the Korean Peninsula. The Korean War had begun in June 1950, when North Korean forces invaded South Korea. American troops entered the conflict as part of a United Nations command and endured a war marked by rapid advances and retreats, bitter winters, rugged mountain terrain, and enormous casualties. Eventually, the front stabilized near the 38th parallel, where both sides fought for limited gains while negotiations continued. At Panmunjom, Lieutenant General William K. Harrison, Jr. signed for the United Nations Command, while General Nam-il signed for the Korean People's Army and Chinese People's Volunteers. The agreement established a military demarcation line and created a demilitarized zone separating the opposing forces. It also laid out procedures for prisoners of war and the enforcement of the ceasefire. When the guns fell silent, Korea remained divided. No permanent peace treaty followed, and the armistice created an uneasy military balance that continues to shape the Korean Peninsula. July 27th remains a day to remember those who served, those who sacrificed, and those who never returned. The fighting stopped, but the cost of the war would be remembered for generations. On July 28, 1868, Secretary of State William Seward certified that the 14th Amendment had been ratified by the required number of states. Written during Reconstruction following the Civil War, the amendment fundamentally changed the Constitution and reshaped the relationship between citizenship, individual rights, the states, and the federal government. Its first section established that people born or naturalized in the United States and subject to its jurisdiction are citizens of both the United States and the state in which they live. This was especially significant after the abolition of slavery, as the nation struggled to define citizenship and the legal status of millions of newly freed Americans. The amendment also prohibited states from depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, and required states to provide equal protection under the law. Those words would become some of the most influential in the Constitution, shaping later court decisions involving civil rights, citizenship, liberty, and the limits of government power. Certification did not immediately erase discrimination or resolve the deep divisions left by the Civil War. Reconstruction remained difficult, contested, and incomplete. But July 28th marked a constitutional turning point. National citizenship, due process, and equal protection were now embedded in the nation's highest law, principles that would continue shaping the meaning of American liberty for generations. On July 29, 1958, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the National Aeronautics and Space Act, creating the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. The decision came during the Cold War, when the Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik had intensified concern that the United States was falling behind in science, technology, and space exploration. NASA built upon the work of the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, known as NACA, which had conducted aviation research for decades, but the new agency's mission extended beyond flight within Earth's atmosphere. Engineers worked with drafting tables, slide rules, analog instruments, vacuum tube electronics, and early computers that could fill entire rooms. NASA officially began operations on October 1, 1958. Its mission included peaceful space exploration, aeronautical research, satellite development, and scientific discovery. Within only a few years, the agency would launch the Mercury and Gemini programs, developing the experience and technology needed for an even more ambitious goal. Less than 11 years after Eisenhower signed the Space Act, American astronauts would walk on the moon. What began as a response to Cold War competition became one of the most ambitious scientific efforts in human history. July 29th marks the beginning of an institution that transformed aviation, spaceflight, science, engineering, and humanity's understanding of the universe. Shortly after midnight on July 30th, 1945, the heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis was struck by torpedoes from the Japanese submarine I-58 while sailing through the Philippine Sea. The ship had just completed a highly secret mission, delivering critical components for the atomic bomb to the island of Tinian. 2 torpedoes caused catastrophic damage, and Indianapolis sank in only minutes. Of nearly 1,200 sailors and Marines aboard, roughly 800 survived the initial sinking and entered the water. Many had little more than life jackets, floater nets, or scattered debris to keep them afloat. No effective distress call brought immediate rescue. For several days, the survivors endured dehydration, exposure, injuries, exhaustion, and the dangers of the open ocean. Their disappearance was not immediately recognized. On August 2nd, an aircraft spotted survivors in the water by chance, triggering an emergency rescue operation. By the time help arrived, only 316 men ultimately survived. The sinking of USS Indianapolis became one of the worst maritime disasters in United States naval history. It occurred during the final weeks of World War II, only days before the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Today, the story is remembered not only for how the ship was lost, but for the extraordinary endurance of those who survived and the sacrifice of those who never came home. On July 31st, 1790, the United States issued its first federal patent to inventor Samuel Hopkins. His invention improved the process for making potash and pearl ash, important materials produced from wood ashes and used in products such as glass, soap, fertilizer, and other goods essential to the early American economy. The patent system reflected an idea written directly into the Constitution. The founders believed government could encourage progress by giving inventors limited legal protection for their discoveries. Protecting useful ideas could encourage experimentation, investment, commerce, and the development of an economy less dependent on foreign technology. Innovation in 1790 looked very different from what we imagine today. There were no electronics, research laboratories, or computerized design systems. Craftsmen relied on hand tools, iron kettles, wood-fired furnaces, mechanical devices, paper drawings, quill pens, and knowledge passed from one generation to another. Hopkins's improvement focused on making an existing industrial process more efficient. That first patent became the beginning of a system that would eventually protect inventions across nearly every field imaginable. From machinery and medicine to communications, transportation, aerospace, and computing, American inventors would continue building on that foundation. July 31st reminds us that innovation was not an afterthought in the early republic. It was deliberately encouraged as part of America's future. On August 1, 1876, President Ulysses S. Grant signed the proclamation admitting Colorado as the 38th state in the Union. Because Colorado entered statehood during the nation's 100th anniversary year, it became known as the Centennial State. Colorado territory had changed dramatically during the previous 2 decades. The discovery of gold in 1859 attracted miners, merchants, settlers, and entrepreneurs to the Rocky Mountain region. Towns expanded, railroads arrived, ranching grew, and mineral development transformed the territory. At the same time, expanding settlement placed increasing pressure on native peoples who had lived throughout the region for generations. Colorado had sought statehood before, but political disagreements delayed admission. By 1876, the effort succeeded. President Grant's proclamation officially completed the process on August 1st, bringing Colorado into a nation that was still rebuilding after the Civil War and rapidly expanding across the Western territories. Colorado's admission represented another stage in the growth of the United States across the continent. Its mountains, mineral wealth, ranch lands, railroads, and growing communities became part of the nation's expanding Western identity. More than anything, the timing of its admission gave Colorado a permanent nickname tied to the nation itself, the Centennial State. On August 2, 1776, delegates to the Continental Congress began signing the engrossed parchment copy of the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia. Congress had voted for independence on July 2nd and adopted the Declaration's final wording on July 4th. The formal parchment copy was prepared afterward for the delegates to sign. John Hancock, serving as President of Congress, placed his famous signature prominently on the document. Most delegates signed on August 2nd, generally grouped according to their state delegations, while several signatures were added later. By signing, these men publicly attached their names to a revolution whose outcome was far from certain. The Declaration did more than announce separation from Great Britain. It stated principles that would echo throughout American history, that people possess natural rights, that legitimate government derives its power from the consent of the governed, and that government exists to secure those rights. The nation would struggle for generations to fully live up to those ideals. August 2nd should not be confused with July 4th. July 4th marks the adoption of the Declaration. August 2nd marks the day most delegates place their names on the engrossed document. Their signatures turned the Declaration into something deeply personal. They were no longer supporting independence anonymously. They were publicly committing their names, reputations, fortunes, and futures to the creation of a new nation.
From the silence that followed war in Korea, to constitutional change, scientific ambition, tragedy at sea, American invention, Western statehood, and the signatures that declared independence, this week reminds us that history is shaped by both extraordinary moments and the people willing to act within them. Understanding history helps us understand what we inherited. Our rights were shaped by generations before us. Our responsibility is to understand them, protect them, and preserve liberty for those who come after us. Double H Customs. Rights. Responsibility. Liberty.